My mother laughed that soft, condescending chuckle across the mahogany table. I had not come here for permission. I was here to end an era. My father was pointing at the door when our biggest investor walked in behind me. He looked straight at them and said he would only sign if I took the chair. That is when I realized telling me I did not understand business was just their excuse for misjudging me my entire life. My name is Natalie Sanders. The rain in Pittsburgh does not wash things clean. It just makes the soot from the steel history stick harder to the glass. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Sanders Microforge headquarters, the sky was the color of a bruised lung. Inside, the air conditioning was humming too loud, trying and failing to circulate air that had gone stale with fear. It was the specific, acrid scent of old money facing new bankruptcy. I walked into the boardroom 10 minutes late. It was a calculated discourtesy. In the 32 years I had been alive, I had never been late to a family dinner, a piano recital, or a flight. Punctuality was the virtue of the subordinate. Today, I was not a subordinate. I wore a charcoal blazer that cost more than my first car, tailored sharp enough to cut, and a white silk blouse that offered no softness, only severe contrast. My heels clicked against the polished concrete floor, a sound that echoed like a hammer striking an anvil in the silence of the room. I carried nothing but a slim silver laptop, no purse, no notepad, no apologies. The room was full. 12 people sat around the massive slab of reclaimed oak that served as the boardroom table. Most of them were men in their 60s who had watched me grow up, men who had given me candy from their pockets when I was 5, and condescending advice about finding a nice husband when I was 25. At the head of the table sat my father, Gordon Sanders. He looked like a lion that had been mangy and starving for a long winter. His silver hair was disheveled. His tie loosened, a rare sign of distress for a man who usually slept in a Windsor knot. To his right was my mother, Diane Sanders. Her posture was rigid, her face a mask of aggressive denial. She was the chief operating officer, the iron spine of the company, or at least she used to be before the osteoporosis of bad management set in. They stopped talking mid-sentence as I closed the door behind me. The silence that followed was heavy, wet, and suffocating. "Natalie," my father said. His voice was a mixture of exhaustion and irritation, the tone one uses for a door-to-door salesman who ignores the no soliciting sign. "We are in the middle of a crisis session. This is a closed board meeting." I didn't stop walking until I reached the empty chair at the far end of the table, directly opposite him. I didn't sit. I placed my laptop on the wood, the metal casing cold against my fingertips. "I know," I said. My voice was level, stripped of any daughterly inflection. "That is why I am here." My mother let out a short, sharp sigh, the kind that used to signal I was in trouble for muddying the carpet. She took off her reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Natalie, please, we do not have time for this today. We are dealing with lenders, unions, and lawyers. This is adult business. Do not dilute the room with family drama right now." "Go home, sweetheart," my father added, waving a hand dismissively as if shooing a fly. "We will do dinner on Sunday, I promise. But right now, you need to leave. You do not understand what is happening here." I looked around the table. The other board members were staring at their papers or their phones, embarrassed on my behalf. They saw a petulant daughter crashing a funeral. They saw a girl who played with numbers while the men built machines. I opened the laptop. The screen glowed, casting a pale light onto my chin. "Cash reserves are at $412,000, I said. The room went from silent to dead. My father froze, his hand still half raised in dismissal. I continued, my eyes scanning the spreadsheet I had memorized 3 days ago. "Accounts payable is over 60 days past due on 40% of your Tier 1 suppliers. Specifically, you owe Reynolds Aluminum $750,000, and they put you on credit hold yesterday afternoon." "Natalie," my mother started, her voice rising. I cut her off with another number. "The covenants on the primary loan with PNC Bank Require a debt-to-EBITDA ratio of under 3. You are currently sitting at 4.5. You have exactly 59 days before the bank accelerates the loan and demands full repayment of $18 million, which you do not have. I looked up from the screen. And your on-time delivery rate for the new aerospace contract, it dropped to 62% last month. You are bleeding out, and the tourniquet you are trying to tie is made of paper. For 10 seconds. The only sound was the rain lashing against the glass. It was a violent silence. My father's face turned a deep, alarming shade of red. He stood up, slamming his palms against the table. The oak vibrated. "Who gave you that?" he roared. The shout bounced off the walls. "That is confidential internal data. Did Renee show you this? Who leaked this to you?" He looked around the table, his eyes wild, hunting for the traitor. "I will fire whoever gave her these files. This is corporate espionage." I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I waited for him to stop shouting. "No one gave it to me. Gordon," I said. I didn't call him Dad. The omission hung in the air like a slap. "I didn't need a leak. I just know how to look at a business that is dying. I tracked your shipping manifests, which are public record. I cross-referenced your vendor lien filings at the county clerk's office. And I analyzed the hiring freeze you instituted 6 months ago while your competitors were staffing up. It is not espionage. It is basic competence." My mother looked at me with wide, horrified eyes. She didn't look impressed. She looked offended. To her, my competence was an insult. It was a violation of the natural order where she was the operator and I was the spectator. "You have no right," she hissed. "You have no right to come in here and humiliate your father. Get out. Now. Security." She reached for the phone on the console in front of her. "She has a right. Diane." The voice came from the side of the room. It was gravelly and calm. Walter Klein. Walter was the chairman of the board. He was 70 years old, a man who had built the first factory with my grandfather. He sat reclined in his chair, his hands folded over his stomach, watching the scene with unreadable eyes. My father turned on him. "Walter, stay out of this. This is a family discipline matter." "It stopped being a family matter when you missed the bond payment last week." "Gordon," Walter said. He didn't look at my father. He looked at me. There was a flicker of something in his eyes. Respect, or maybe just resignation. "She stays," Walter said. "On what grounds?" my mother demanded, her hand hovering over the phone. "She is not an officer of this company. She is not an employee. She holds 0 shares. Actually," Walter said, reaching into his leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of stapled documents and slid them down the center of the table. They spun smoothly across the polished wood and came to a rest in front of my father. "She is the largest shareholder we have," Walter said. My father looked at the papers. He didn't touch them, as if they were radioactive. "What are you talking about?" "We own the majority. The family owns 51%. You own 30%, I corrected him. You sold 21% over the last 5 years to cover your personal real estate losses and to fund that failed expansion in Ohio. You sold them to 3 different limited liability companies." My father looked up, confusion warring with anger. "Yes, Atlas Holdings, Blue River Capital, and Stone Creek Partners, passive investors, friendly capital. I am Atlas," I said. My mother gasped. It was a theatrical sound, but the shock was real. "I am Blue River," I continued, my voice remaining flat. "And I am Stone Creek." "That is impossible," my father stammered. Those were institutional buyers. I met with their representatives, lawyers, men in suits." "You met with my proxies," I said. "You were so happy to get the cash injection to cover your mistakes that you never asked who was signing the checks at the top of the chain. You assumed it was Wall Street money. You assumed it was men who didn't care about the day-to-day operations. My mother stood up slowly. She looked at me as if I were a stranger who had broken into her house. "You went behind our backs, we raised you, we gave you everything, and you set up shell companies to deceive us. I set up shell companies because if I had used my own name, You would have laughed me out of the room, I said. Just like you tried to do 5 minutes ago. Walter cleared his throat again. According to the registrar, the entities controlled by Natalie Sanders currently hold 44% of the voting stock. That gives her the right to call a meeting, it gives her the right to inspect the books, and it certainly gives her the right to be in this room. This is betrayal. My father spat out the word. He looked physically ill. You are eating the food from our table and cutting the meat with a knife you brought to stab us. How could you? We are your parents, and this is a corporation, I replied. Not a dining table. The emotional weight of the moment threatened to crack my composure. I could feel the heat rising in my chest. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to ask why they trusted strangers with their legacy, but wouldn't trust their own daughter with a spreadsheet. I wanted to ask why family only meant blind loyalty to their errors, never respect for my skills, but I pushed it down. I pushed it down into the cold, dark place where I kept the numbers. 44% is not control, my mother said, grasping at straws. Her voice was trembling, but her eyes were hard. We still have the board. You can't dictate anything. You are just a minority shareholder with a big mouth. We can outvote you? I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 9:15 in the morning. You are right, I said. 44% is not control. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a purchase agreement, time-stamped at 8:30 that morning. That is why, before I came here, I stopped by the office of Mr. Henderson. I said, Mr. Henderson was the former vice president of engineering. He had retired 3 years ago with a significant stock package, a man my father had pushed out because he asked too many questions about safety protocols. Mr. Henderson was very worried about the value of his retirement nest egg given the current rumors, I said. He was very happy to cash out at a premium. I slid the single sheet across the table. It stopped next to the stack Walter had provided. I bought his 6.5% stake this morning, I said. The wire transfer cleared 45 minutes ago. My father picked up the paper. His hands were shaking so bad the paper rattled. He read the numbers. He read the signature. He read the timestamp. He dropped the paper and sank back into his chair. He looked small. For the first time in my life, the giant who had cast a shadow over my entire existence looked small. That puts me at 50.5%, I said. I looked at Walter. He gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. He knew. He had probably known for weeks. He was a survivor, and he knew which way the wind was blowing. I finally moved. I walked around the end of the table. I didn't go to my father's side. I didn't go to comfort my mother. I walked to the very center of the room, standing behind the empty chair that was usually reserved for presentations. I am now the controlling shareholder of Sanders Microforge, I stated. The silence now wasn't just heavy. It was absolute. It was the silence of a regime change. You cannot do this, my mother whispered, tears finally spilling over. You do not understand business. Natalie, you are a girl. You play with calculators. You do not know how to run a factory. You will destroy everything we built. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had told me to major in art history because math was too aggressive. I looked at the man who had told me that business was about gut instinct, right before he drove the company into a ditch based on his gut. You have 60 days before this company ceases to exist, I said. Your gut instincts have burned $18 million in 2 years. Your adult business methods have alienated our best engineers and our biggest customers. I placed my hands flat on the table and leaned forward, looking into the eyes of every board member present. So, I said, my voice cutting through the gloom of the Pittsburgh rain. Now, let's talk business like adults. To understand why I walked into that boardroom with a loaded gun made of voting shares, you have to understand the smell of cutting fluid. It is a distinct scent, sulfurous and sweet, like burnt sugar mixed with old pennies. For most children, the smell of home is baking bread or laundry detergent. For me, It was the residue of the factory floor that clung to my father's skin when he came home at 7 o'clock at night. It was the fine gray dust that settled in the creases of his hands, no matter how hard he scrubbed them with industrial soap. I did not grow up in a house. I grew up in a satellite office of Sanders Microforge. The dinner table was not for conversation about school or friends. It was an extension of the boardroom. The salt and pepper shakers were used to simulate supply chains. My mother would move the salt cellar across the lace tablecloth and tell me that if the raw aluminum did not arrive by Tuesday, the line stopped on Thursday. And if the line stopped on Thursday, the family did not eat on Sunday. The mantra was drilled into me before I knew how to tie my shoes. The company is blood. It was not just a business. It was a living, breathing organ that kept us alive, and it required total devotion. Back then, Sanders Microforge was a titan. We did not just make metal parts. We made the impossible possible. We manufactured high-reliability components for deep-sea exploration vessels and low-Earth orbit satellites. There was a photo in the hallway of my father shaking hands with a NASA administrator in 1998. I used to stop and stare at it, believing that my father held the sky up with his bare hands. But devotion in my family came with a specific set of conditions. You were expected to serve the company, but only in the way they deemed appropriate. When I was 18, I told them I wanted to study applied mathematics and quantitative finance. My father had looked at me as if I had said I wanted to become a circus clown. He told me that business was about handshakes and iron, not imaginary numbers on a screen. My mother called it dreamy and unrealistic. She said I was afraid of getting my hands dirty. They wanted me to study human resources, or maybe communications, something soft that could smooth the edges of the rough men who worked the lathes. They never understood that math is the purest form of reality. Math does not lie. Math does not have an ego. Math does not refuse to pivot because this is how we have always done it. After graduation, I did not come home. I could not come home to be a secretary in a kingdom I wanted to command. I went to New York. I landed a job at Larkspur Capital. To my parents. Larkspur was a small fund. That is what my mother told her friends at the country club. She would say, "Natalie is working at a little investment firm in the city." Finding herself, they had no idea. Larkspur Capital was a distressed asset turnaround firm. We were the paramedics of the corporate world. We specialized in taking manufacturing companies that were bleeding out, stripping away the rot, and rebuilding them into lean, profitable machines. By the time I was 28, I was a principal. I was managing a portfolio worth $200 million. I had restructured supply chains in Detroit and renegotiated labor contracts in Ohio. I had fired CEOs twice my age because they were letting nostalgia bankrupt their shareholders. I was good at it. I was ruthless because I had to be. But I was fair. I learned that saving a company often meant killing the culture that built it. For years, I tried to bring that expertise home. I would visit for holidays, and I would see the cracks in the foundation of Sanders Microforge. I saw them holding on to inventory for 6 months when the industry standard was 3 weeks. I saw them buying machines from friends rather than bidding out for the best technology. One Thanksgiving, 3 years ago, I sat in the living room while my father complained about a shipment delay. I gently suggested he look into predictive analytics for his supply chain risks. I told him there was software that could anticipate these bottlenecks. He laughed. He actually laughed and patted my knee. He said, "Natalie, honey, you look at spreadsheets. I look at steel. You will never understand this industry. It is about relationships, not algorithms." That was the moment I stopped talking. I stopped offering advice. I realized that to them, I would always be the little girl in the pigtails who needed to be protected from the real work. They did not see a financial expert. They saw a daughter who needed to be kept busy with safe hobbies, but silence did not mean blindness. 14 months ago, I received an email from an old contact, Mr. Henderson, the former VP of Engineering, the man whose shares I would eventually buy to seal my control. He was still on the internal distribution list for the quarterly updates, likely due to an administrative oversight that my mother, the COO, had missed. He forwarded me the Q3 report with a simple subject line, "Look." I opened the file on my phone while sitting in a cab in Manhattan. I scrolled past the optimistic executive summary my father had written. I went straight to the cash flow statement. My heart stopped. They were burning cash at a rate of $300,000 a month. They were financing long-term debt with short-term credit lines, a classic suicide move. They had leveraged the factory land to pay for a failed expansion into a consumer product line that no one wanted. I saw the end. I saw the bankruptcy filing. I saw the auction block where the machines would be sold for scrap. I saw the legacy of my grandfather dissolved for pennies on the dollar. I called my father that night. I didn't mention the report. I just asked how things were. "Business is booming," he said, his voice loud and overly cheerful. "We are thinking of buying a vacation home in Florida next year." He was lying. He was lying to me. And worse, he was lying to himself. That was the night the 14-month plan began. I knew I could not walk in and ask for authority. They would never give it. They would rather drive the bus off the cliff than let me take the wheel. Because giving me the wheel meant admitting they were lost. So, I decided to take the bus. I did not do it out of vengeance. I did not do it to humiliate them. Though I knew humiliation would be the inevitable byproduct, I did it because I loved them. I loved the smell of the cutting fluid. I loved the history. And I refused to let their pride bury my heritage. I formed 3 limited liability companies in Delaware: Atlas Holdings, Blue River Capital, Stone Creek Partners, generic names, faceless names. I started small. I contacted the employees who had been let go during the minor restructuring 2 years prior. These were men and women who held small pockets of stock through the employee stock ownership plan. They were angry. They felt abandoned by the family they had served. When a lawyer from Atlas Holdings called offering 20% above market value for their illiquid shares, they sold without hesitation. I spent my bonuses. I liquidated my own portfolio. I took out a mortgage on my apartment in Tribeca. I poured every dollar I had earned saving other people's companies into buying my own family's company piece by piece. It was a slow, quiet invasion. I remember buying a block of shares from a cousin who wanted to open a restaurant. He had no idea the buyer was me. He just saw a check that cleared. I remember buying shares from a supplier who had accepted equity in lieu of payment when the company couldn't pay its bills. Month by month, the percentage ticked up. 5%, 12%, 20%. As the numbers grew, so did the guilt. There were nights I couldn't sleep. I felt like a predator stalking my own parents. I would look at the framed photo of us on my nightstand, taken when I was 10, smiling in front of the factory gates. I felt like I was betraying that little girl. But then I would see another report. I would see the on-time delivery rates plummeting. I would hear through the grapevine that the bank was calling for meetings. The guilt hardened into resolve. I set a rule for myself: I would not intervene until the point of no return. I would wait until they were standing on the edge of the precipice, because if I stepped in too early, they would fight me and we would both fall. I needed them to be desperate. I needed the situation to be so dire that even their massive egos would have no choice but to pause, even if just for a second. Last week, I saw the covenant breach notification. I knew the clock had run out. It was time to close the trap. Before I walked into that boardroom this morning, I stopped in the hallway outside. The rain was hammering the roof. I stood in front of that old photo of my father and the NASA administrator. The glass was dusty. The frame was slightly crooked. I reached out and straightened it. My father looked so proud in that picture. He looked like a man who knew exactly who he was. I wondered if he would ever look at me that way. Probably not. After today, he might never look at me with anything other than resentment. I accepted that price. I took a deep breath, inhaling the faint, metallic scent of the air. If they will not listen to love, I whispered to the empty hallway, I will make them listen to corporate law. Then I turned, walked to the double doors, and prepared to break my parents' hearts so I could save their lives. Ownership of equity gives you a voice, but ownership of debt gives you teeth. While my parents were panicking over the missed bond payment, They failed to see the true guillotine hanging over their necks. It was buried on page 42 of their primary credit agreement with the bank. It was a standard covenant clause, but in their current condition, it was lethal. The clause stated that if the company's ratio of debt to earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization rose above 3.5 for 2 consecutive quarters, the lender had the right to accelerate the entire loan. That meant the bank could demand the full $18 million immediately. Not next year, not next month. Today. I discovered this 2 weeks before the boardroom confrontation, during a sleepless night in my apartment analyzing the leaked documents. My parents were sitting at a ratio of 4.2. They were already in default. The bank just hadn't pulled the trigger yet. I knew banks. I knew that regional banks hated bad press and hated foreclosing on family businesses even more. They would rather sell the bad paper to a third party for 80 cents on the dollar and wash their hands of the mess. So, I became that third party. I instructed my broker to approach the bank's distressed asset division. I used a separate entity, distinct from the ones holding my stock, called Ironwood Credit. The negotiation took 6 hours. The bank was relieved to offload a toxic loan that was keeping their compliance officer awake at night. I bought a $5 million tranche of my family's debt for $3.8 million. This was not an investment. This was the purchase of a weapon. As a creditor, I now had legal standing to force a restructuring in bankruptcy court if they tried to fight me. It was the ultimate leverage. If they refused to recognize my shareholder vote, I could simply foreclose on the factory equipment. But secrets in a mid-sized company are hard to keep, especially when you are dealing with a CFO like Renee Dalton. Renee was not part of the family, but she had survived 10 years of my father's chaotic management by being meticulously pragmatic. She was the one holding the glue gun that kept the ship from falling apart. 3 days after I purchased the debt tranche, my phone rang. It was a blocked number. "I do not know who is behind Ironwood Credit," Renee's voice came through, tinny and sharp, "but I know that the due diligence questions I received during the sale asked about specific inventory depreciation schedules that only someone with intimate knowledge of our chaotic warehouse system would ask." I remained silent. "Natalie," she said, "it was not a question. If you are doing what I think you are doing, you need to know that your father is planning to pledge the patent portfolio to secure emergency funding from a hard money lender in Chicago. If he signs that deal on Friday, your debt position becomes worthless because the patents are the only real collateral left." I sat up straight in my office chair. "Why are you telling me this, Renee?" "Because the hard money lender is a shark who breaks kneecaps," she replied flatly, "and because I checked the payroll account this morning. We have enough cash for one more cycle. I do not care about the family drama. Natalie, I care that the 400 people on that floor get paid. If you are the better bet, prove it." She hung up. That call changed everything. Renee Dalton was not an enemy. She was an exhausted ally waiting for a competent general. But her warning revealed a terrifying timeline. I did not have months. I had days. I needed to secure the board before my father signed away the patents. I arranged a clandestine meeting with Walter Klein, the chairman. We met in a diner 20 miles outside of Pittsburgh, a place where no one would recognize the 2 most powerful people in the company's governance structure eating cherry pie at midnight. Walter looked tired. The lines on his face were deep trenches of worry. "You are playing a dangerous game, kid," he said, stirring black coffee. "Your father thinks he is saving the legacy. He does not see that the sharks are circling." "I am the shark, Walter," I said. "No," he shook his head. "You are just the angry cub. The real sharks are from New York. I got a call yesterday from a private equity firm called Vulture Peak, appropriate name, right? They offered to inject capital, but their term sheet is brutal. They want to liquidate the pension fund and sell the real estate. They want to turn Sanders Microforge into a shell company that imports cheap parts from overseas and stamps Made in USA on the box." My stomach turned. That was the nightmare scenario. "I won't let that happen," I said. "I have a restructuring plan ready. It is drafted and legally reviewed." I slid a leather-bound folder across the sticky table. 1, I listed, ticking off the points on my fingers. New capital injection of $10 million from my fund. Larkspur, structured as convertible preferred stock. 2, the immediate removal of Gordon and Diane Sanders from operational control. They keep their board seats, but they lose their executive powers. 3, the establishment of an executive committee to oversee the turnaround. Walter opened the folder. He read the summary page, his eyebrows raising. And 4, I added, my voice dropping an octave. A kill switch. A what? A triggering event clause. I explained. If the family tries to obstruct the turnaround plan, or if they attempt to interfere with the new management, my preferred stock automatically converts to supervoting shares that dilute their ownership down to 12%. It is a nuclear deterrent. I do not want to use it, but I will if they force my hand. Walter whistled low and long. You really are not the little girl who used to bring me lemonade anymore. There is one more thing, I said, pulling up a document on my tablet. We have a leak. This was the twist that had kept me up for the last 48 hours. In my forensic analysis of the company's email server access provided by the same oversight that gave me the financial reports, I had found a pattern of encrypted attachments being sent to an external server. Someone on the board is talking to Iron Veil Dynamics, I said. Iron Veil was our bitterest rival. They were a massive conglomerate that had been trying to crush Sanders Microforge for a decade. Who? Walter asked, his face hardening. I cannot prove it yet, I said. But the data packets leave the server every time there is a board meeting. They know our pricing model. They know our delivery failures. That is why they have been able to undercut us on every bid for the last 6 months. Someone is selling us out to drive the stock price down, so Iron Veil can buy the intellectual property for pennies in bankruptcy court. Walter gripped his coffee cup until his knuckles turned white. Find them, Natalie. Find them and bury them. I will, I promised. But first, I need a wartime CEO. I cannot run this company. I am an investor. I need someone who knows the smell of the machine shop better than I do. The next morning, I flew to Detroit. Marion Voss was a legend in the manufacturing world. She had saved Detroit Diesel in the 90s and had turned around 3 aerospace suppliers since then. She was 60 years old, chain-smoked despite it being illegal indoors almost everywhere, and had a reputation for being impossible to work with because she refused to suffer fools. I found her in her garage, restoring a 1965 Mustang. She was wearing grease-stained coveralls and wiping her hands on a rag. Natalie Sanders, she said without looking up, I heard you were buying up your daddy's debt. News travels fast, I said. Bad news travels at the speed of light, she grunted. What do you want? I want you to run Sanders Microforge. She laughed, a harsh barking sound. Kid, that company is a corpse. Your father has let the technology rot. Your supply chain is a joke. And the culture. The culture is a toxic shrine to the good old days. I know, I said. That is why I am firing my father. Marion stopped wiping her hands. She turned to look at me, her eyes sharp and assessing. You are firing Gordon. He is stubborn as a mule. I have 50.5% of the vote as of this morning. I lied. I was actually at 49.8%, waiting for one last transaction to clear. And I have the debt. I control the board. I have a check for $10 million ready to clear payroll and update the tooling. Marion leaned against the car. I have conditions, expensive ones. Name them. I want full autonomy, she said. No family interference. If your mother walks onto the factory floor and tries to tell a shift supervisor how to pack a crate, I ban her from the building. If your father tries to override a vendor selection, I cut his company credit card, and I want equity. You get 3% equity vesting over 4 years, I countered, and a base salary of $400,000. But the autonomy, you have it. I will write it into your contract. You answer to the board, and right now, the board is me. She stared at me for a long moment. She was measuring me, looking for the weakness, the hesitation. You are going to have to destroy your relationship with them, you know, she said softly, to save the company. You have to break the family. Are you ready for that? The question hung in the cold garage air. Was I ready? I thought about the dinner table. I thought about the dismissal. I thought about the way they looked at me like I was an alien species, because I preferred calculus to casual conversation. The family is already broken, I said. I am just trying to save the house so we have a roof over our heads while we fix it. Marion extended a grease-covered hand. Deal. I shook it without hesitation. The grease transferred to my palm. Cool and dark. I flew back to Pittsburgh that afternoon. I sat in my hotel room, my laptop open, watching the final transaction process. It was a purchase of shares from a small family trust that had held stock since my grandfather's days. The trustee had been happy to sell at the premium I offered. I hit refresh on the browser. The number updated, 50.52%. I sat back. The adrenaline that had been fueling me for weeks suddenly felt like lead in my veins. It was done. The trap was set. The debt was secured. The CEO was hired. The legal documents were bulletproof, scrubbed by 3 different law firms to ensure there was not a single loophole my father's lawyers could exploit. I looked at the digital clock on the corner of my screen. It was 6 a.m. The board meeting was at 9. I stood up and walked to the window. Pittsburgh was waking up. I could see the distant smokestacks of the Sanders Microforge plant. Somewhere down there, the 3rd shift was clocking out, and the 1st shift was clocking in. 400 families depended on that building. They depended on the payroll clearing next week. My parents thought I was a child playing dress-up. They thought I did not understand the weight of responsibility. I picked up my phone and sent a single text message to Walter Klein. I have the votes. See you at 9. Then I went to the closet and took out the charcoal blazer. It was time to go to work. You cannot do this, my father said. His voice was not loud anymore. It was tight, squeezed through a throat constricted by panic. He looked at the papers Walter had slid across the table. Then he looked at me, his eyes narrowing. This is a family company. Natalie, the bylaws restrict stock transfers. You cannot just buy shares from strangers and walk in here claiming you own the place. Those transfers are invalid. He looked to the company lawyer, a man named Sterling who had been on our retainer since the 90s. Tell her, Sterling, tell her the right of first refusal clause blocks this. Sterling shifted in his seat. He did not look at my father. He looked at his notepad. Actually, Mr. Sanders, the right of first refusal applies only to Class A shares held by direct family members. The shares the shares the entities purchased were Class B common stock held by the Employee Stock Ownership Plan and former executives. The 5-year vesting period on those expired last month. They were free to sell to any buyer. And they sold, Walter added, his voice dry, because they were afraid the shares would be worth 0 by Christmas. This is a hostile takeover, my mother said. She was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. You are stealing this company from your own parents. I am not stealing anything, I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. I am the only person in this room willing to pay for the wreckage you created. I tapped the enter key on my laptop. The projector screen behind me, which had been displaying the dismal sales figures, flickered and changed. A new slide appeared. It was simple. It featured the logo of Larkspur Capital and a single, massive number in bold blue font. This is a term sheet, I announced. Larkspur Capital is prepared to issue a convertible bond to Sanders Microforge in the amount of $180 million. The air left the room. $180 million. It was a number so large it seemed abstract to them. It was 10 times the debt that was currently drowning us. It was enough to not just pay off the bank, but to retool the entire factory, hire the best engineers in the country, and dominate the supply chain for the next decade. 180 million, my father repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. You do not have that kind of money. My fund does, I corrected him, and we are ready to deploy it immediately. But this is not a gift. Gordon, it is a convertible bond. That means if the company fails to meet the performance targets I set, the debt converts to equity, And if that happens, my ownership stake goes from 50% to 90%. You will be diluted down to nothing. You are holding a gun to our heads, my mother whispered. I am holding a defibrillator. I shot back. And I am about to shock this heart back into rhythm, whether you like it or not. You call this robbery. I am offering to save your legacy. I am offering to keep the Sanders name on the building. Any other investor would strip the copper out of the walls and sell the land for condos. My father stood up. He smoothed his tie, trying to regain the stature he had lost in the last 10 minutes. We do not need your money, Natalie. We do not need your conditions. You think you are the only one with a plan. You think I have been sitting on my hands. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a blue folder. He tossed it onto the table with a defiant slap. I have a plan, he declared. A strategic partnership. I have been in talks with a group out of Chicago. They understand the industry. They respect the family. They are willing to come in as minority partners, leave management in place, and provide bridge financing. He looked around the table, a triumphant sneer on his face. See, that is how adults do business. We find partners who respect us, not children who try to usurp us. I did not move to pick up the folder. I didn't have to. I knew exactly what was inside. Walter reached out and took the blue folder. He opened it slowly. He put on his reading glasses. The room waited. My father stood there, chest puffed out, waiting for Walter to validate him. Walter read the first page, then he read the second. His expression did not change, but his eyes grew colder. Gordon, Walter said softly, this is not a partnership. Of course it is, my father insisted. It is a restructuring agreement. This is an asset purchase agreement under Section 363 of the Bankruptcy Code, Walter said, reading from the document. This group isn't investing in the company. They are offering to buy the machinery, the inventory, and the customer list after you file for Chapter 11 protection. That is just legal boilerplate. My father waved his hand. The important part is the operational continuity. Gordon, look at Schedule C, Walter said, his voice hard. He turned the page and pointed to a table. Projected headcount post-acquisition 40. My mother froze. 40. We currently employ 212 people. Renee Dalton, the CFO, spoke up from the end of the table. Her voice was shaking slightly. This deal keeps 40 people. Walter continued, looking up at my father with a mixture of pity and disgust. It keeps the executive team, that is you and Diane and a skeleton crew, to manage the logistics of shipping the inventory to their warehouses in Illinois. Everyone else, the machinists, the engineers, the janitors, they are all terminated on day one without severance. That is not what they told me, my father stammered. The red flush on his face was receding, leaving him pale. They said we would streamline. They said we would focus on core competencies. They lied to you, Gordon, I said. Or maybe you just heard what you wanted to hear because they promised you could keep your title and your corner office. My mother looked at my father. For the first time in my life, I saw the blind adoration in her eyes crack. She looked at the man she had followed for 40 years, the man she had defended against every critic, and she saw the truth. He was willing to sacrifice 170 families just to avoid admitting he had failed. Gordon, she whispered, 40 people. What about the guys on the floor? What about Miller? What about the shift supervisors? It is business, Diane, my father snapped. But there was no power in it. We have to survive if the ship is sinking. You save the captain first. No, Renee said. She stood up. Renee was a small woman, usually quiet, usually blending into the background of spreadsheets, but today she stood tall. If the ship is sinking, the captain goes down with it. That is the rule. And right now, Gordon, we are not just sinking, we are already underwater. Renee turned to me. Natalie is right about the cash flow. I ran the projection this morning. Based on the current burn rate and the credit hold from Reynolds Aluminum, we will miss payroll in exactly 6 weeks, October 14th. That is the day the checks bounce. 6 weeks, my mother repeated. She looked at her hands. We have never missed payroll, not once, even in the recession. You will miss it this time, I said. Unless you sign my term sheet. The silence returned. It was different this time. It wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence of defeat. The blue folder lay open on the table like a dead bird. The number 40 seemed to hang in the air. An accusation. If we sign, my mother asked, her voice trembling. What happens? If you sign, the $180 million becomes available in tranches, I said. The first tranche clears the debt with PNC Bank and covers payroll for the next year, but it comes with conditions. I walked to the whiteboard and picked up a marker. I wrote 3 words: transparency, accountability, competence. Condition 1, I said. The board of directors is expanded to 7 seats. I appoint 3, you keep your 2, Walter stays, and we bring in an independent industry expert. Condition 2, I continued. We implement a new executive committee. Gordon, you remain CEO in title, but all operational decisions, all spending above $5,000, and all hiring and firing must be approved by the committee. You are gelding me, my father spat. You are making me a figurehead in my own company. I am making you a constitutional monarch, I said. You get to cut ribbons. You get to shake hands. But you do not get to drive the car anymore because you keep crashing it. And condition 3, I said, capping the marker. If we miss the EBITDA targets for 2 consecutive quarters, or if there is any material interference from the family in the day-to-day operations, what I call the kill switch Larkspur Capital automatically exercises its warrants. We will take 90% of the equity, and I will remove you from the board entirely. My father looked at the board. He looked at the term sheet. He looked at the blue folder with the number 40. He laughed. It was a bitter, dry sound. You have it all figured out, don't you? You sat in your high-rise in New York and drew up these little models. You think you can quantify blood? You think a spreadsheet teaches you how to manage men who have been working steel since before you were born. He leaned forward, his eyes burning with a desperate, wounded pride. You think you understand business, Natalie. You don't. You understand finance. You understand how to move money around, but you don't understand the soul of a company. A few financial models do not teach you about life. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike, the man who had bought me my first calculator, the man who was now trying to burn down his own village to save his statue in the square. I felt a profound sadness, but no hesitation. You are wrong, Dad, I said. It was the first time I had called him Dad since entering the room. I know exactly what the soul of this company is. It is the people who work downstairs. It is the quality of the product we ship. It is the promise we keep to our customers. I placed my hands on the table, leaning in until I was inches from his face. And as for understanding, I said softly, my voice carrying to every corner of the room. People only say, I do not understand when they are afraid I understand too well. I pushed the term sheet toward him. Also, I pushed a pen. Sign it, I said. Or explain to the 200 people downstairs why they are losing their jobs in 6 weeks. My father looked at the pen. He looked at my mother. She was crying silently, tears tracking through her foundation. She gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It was the nod of surrender. He picked up the pen. His hand was heavy. He signed his name. The scratch of the pen against the paper was the loudest sound in the world. Meeting adjourned, I said. But I knew this wasn't over. I saw the look in his eyes as he capped the pen. It wasn't resignation. It was hatred. He had signed the paper, but he hadn't accepted the defeat. He was already thinking of a way out. He was already planning the counterattack. I turned to Renee. Get the wire instructions ready. The first 10 million lands tomorrow. Yes, Ms. Sanders, she said. Ms. Sanders, not Natalie, not the daughter, the boss. As the room cleared, Walter walked up to me. He patted my shoulder. You bought yourself time, kid. But watch your back. A wounded animal is the most dangerous thing in the woods." "I know," I said, watching my parents retreat out the door without looking back at me. "But I brought a cage." The ink on the term sheet was barely dry before the counterattack began. I naively thought that signing the agreement would bring a ceasefire. I thought that saving the company from immediate insolvency would earn me, if not gratitude, at least a temporary truce. I was wrong. I had underestimated the ferocity of humiliated pride. My parents did not see the capital injection as a lifeline. They saw it as a hostile occupation, and they immediately began funding an insurgency with the very money I had provided to save them. It started with the lawyers. 3 days after the board meeting, I received a notification from our general counsel. My father had retained Holloway and Tate, a massive corporate litigation firm based in Chicago known for their scorched earth tactics. They were not representing the company. They were representing my parents personally. But they were billing their hours to the office of the chairman. They were scrubbing the contract I had forced them to sign, looking for any syntactical error, any vague definition of material breach, any loopholed comma that would allow them to void the deal and claw back control while keeping the cash. I saw the invoice. They were charging $850 an hour to dismantle the safety net I had woven, but the legal war was just the surface noise. The real battle was being fought in the break rooms and the smoking areas outside the loading dock. My parents launched an internal public relations campaign that was as brilliant as it was poisonous. They couldn't fight me on the math, so they fought me on the narrative. I walked into the administrative wing on a Tuesday morning, carrying a tray of coffees for the diligence team. The conversation died instantly. 2 secretaries who had known me since I was in braces suddenly found their computer screens incredibly fascinating. I heard the whispers as I passed. "Vulture Fund. Asset stripper. She is just here to fatten the pig before the slaughter." They were painting me as the villain of a Wall Street movie. My mother had been weeping in the break room a calculated performance, telling the payroll manager that I had forced them to sign away their legacy to New York interests who didn't care about Pittsburgh. She omitted the part where the payroll manager would have received a bounce check on Friday if not for those New York interests. I was isolated. The 400 employees I was fighting for looked at me with a mixture of fear and disdain. To them, I wasn't the daughter who had come home. I was the Grim Reaper in a designer blazer. I sat in the temporary office I had requisitioned a glass-walled fishbowl that offered zero privacy and tried to focus on the inventory reconciliation. It was hard to focus when you could feel the hostility radiating through the glass. Then came the blow that nearly knocked me out. Renee Dalton knocked on my door at 2 p.m. She didn't look like her usual stoic self. She looked pale. "We have a problem with PNC Bank," she said, closing the door and pulling the blinds, a gesture that signaled catastrophic news. "We paid them," I said, putting down my pen. "The wire cleared. We are current." "It is not about the payment," Renee said. "The compliance officer just called. They are freezing the revolving credit line. They are putting a hold on all outgoing transfers pending an investigation." "Investigation into what?" I demanded. "Insider trading," Renee whispered. The room seemed to tilt. Insider trading allegations were the kiss of death for a fund manager. Even a whisper of it could trigger an SEC audit, freeze my assets at Larkspur, and cause my investors to pull their capital. "Someone sent an anonymous tip to the bank's fraud department," Renee explained. "The email claimed that you used confidential, non-public information obtained illicitly to purchase the debt and force the equity conversion. They claimed you rigged the valuation based on data you stole." "I did not steal it," I said, my voice rising. "I used the data provided to shareholders, and I used the data you legally possess." "I know that," Renee said, "but the bank does not. They have to investigate, and while they investigate, we cannot buy raw materials. The factory stops in 3 days." "Who sent it?" I asked. The ice in my veins was spreading. "It was sent from a Proton Mail account," Renee said. "Encrypted, anonymous." "Find it," I said. "You are the administrator of the network. If it originated inside this building, there is a trace. Find the IP address." Find the MAC address. I do not care if you have to tear the server apart. Renee left. I spent the next hour pacing the small office. I felt like I was suffocating. This was not business. This was personal destruction. Someone wanted me gone so badly they were willing to nuke the company's credit rating to do it. At 5 o'clock, Renee returned. She was holding a single sheet of paper. She placed it on my desk and didn't say a word. I looked at the log. The anonymous email had been routed through a VPN, but the user had logged into the network first to access the specific file attached to the complaint. The login credentials used were admin L2, DS, Diane Sanders. It was my mother. She hadn't sent it from her personal email. She had used the IT administrative privileges she insisted on keeping for oversight to access the server, cloak her identity poorly, and send a letter that could send her daughter to federal prison. I stared at the paper. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a sharp, tearing sensation. This wasn't just a tactic. This was a statement that she would rather see me destroyed than see me succeed in her place. "Do you want me to call the lawyers?" Renee asked softly. "This is actionable. It is defamation. It is tortious interference." I looked through the glass wall. I could see my mother's office across the atrium. She was on the phone, laughing, twirling a pen. She looked happy. She thought she had won. She thought the freeze would force me to back down, to apologize, to leave. "No," I said. I folded the paper and slid it into my locked drawer. "Not yet." "Natalie," Renee warned, "if you do not fight this, the bank will—" "I will handle the bank," I cut her off. "I will send them the audit trail proving the data was legitimate, but I am not going to fire the gun on this piece of paper yet. I am going to save it." "For what?" "For the town hall," I said. "If I expose her now, it is just a family squabble. She will deny it. She will say she was hacked. I need to dismantle the narrative, not just the lie." I walked out of the office to get air. I ran into Walter Klein near the elevator. He looked at me, and then he looked at the hostile faces of the staff around us. "You are losing them, kid," Walter said quietly. He leaned on his cane. "You can have all the shares in the world. You can have the debt, but if you lose the trust of the floor, you lose everything. You cannot run a factory with ghosts and enemies." "They think I am the enemy, Walter," I said. "Then show them you are not," he said. "Stop fighting the board and start fighting for the workers. That is the only alliance that matters." He was right. I had been so focused on the boardroom chess match that I had neglected the pawns, and in this game, the pawns were the ones who actually built the product. I went down to the factory floor. I found Marion Voss there. She was wearing a hard hat and safety goggles, standing next to the massive 5-axis CNC machine that was the pride of the new expansion. It was silent. "Why isn't this running?" I asked, shouting over the ambient hum of the ventilation. Marion turned. She looked furious. She took off her glasses and wiped them on her shirt. "It is not running because it cannot hold a tolerance," she said. "It is drifting 5 microns on every third cut. We have scrapped $40,000 of titanium in the last 2 days trying to calibrate it." "It is a brand new machine," I said. "It cost $2 million. "It is a brand new piece of junk," Marion corrected. I checked the serial numbers. "This isn't a top-tier German unit. It is a knockoff chassis with a fancy controller slapped on it." She kicked the base of the machine. "I looked at the procurement logs," Marion said. "Your father didn't bid this out. He bought it from a distributor in Ohio, a guy named Miller." "Miller." The name sounded familiar. "Frank Miller," Marion said. "Your dad's golf partner, the guy he goes fishing with in the Keys. He paid full price for a machine that is worth half that, and he probably did it because Miller needed to move inventory before the quarter ended. So we have a $2 million paperweight because my father wanted to help a friend. We have a bottleneck that is killing the entire production schedule." Marion said. "And the union steward is over there." She pointed to a burly man watching us with crossed arms, "telling his guys that you are the one cutting corners on maintenance. I looked at the machine. I looked at the union steward. I looked at the floor where the scrap titanium lay in a heap of shiny, twisted metal. This was the smoking gun. The email from my mother was malice. This was incompetence. This was the proof that their relationships were actually liabilities. "Can we fix it?" I asked. "I can strip the controller and rebuild the servo drives," Marion said. "But it will take 2 weeks and another $50,000 in parts, and we have to shut down the line." "Do it," I said. "I will sign the check." "The guys aren't going to like the downtime," Marion warned. "They lose overtime pay." "They won't lose a dime," I said. "Pay them to train. Pay them to clean. I do not care. Just do not let their paychecks drop." Marion nodded. She looked at me with the first spark of genuine respect I had seen. "All right, that I can sell." I walked back upstairs, my head throbbing. I had the evidence of the sabotage. I had the evidence of the negligence. I had the ammunition to end this war. But I knew that firing it would leave scars that would never heal. I was preparing to publicly execute my parents' reputation to save the company they founded. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message. Unknown number. I stopped in the middle of the hallway, the fluorescent lights humming above me. I unlocked the screen. "The biggest investor will meet your family on Friday. Make sure the boardroom is clean." I stared at the screen. My parents had been bragging all week about a mystery savior, a heavy hitter they had contacted who was going to buy out my position and restore the natural order. They believed this meeting on Friday was their victory lap. I looked at the text again. I knew exactly who the investor was, and I knew that Friday wasn't going to be a negotiation. It was going to be a revelation. I put the phone back in my pocket. I walked past my mother's office. She was still smiling, still playing the role of the besieged queen. "Enjoy it, Mom," I thought, the bitterness tasting like copper in my mouth. Enjoy the feeling of winning, because Friday is coming. The silence in the main assembly hall was louder than the machinery ever was. Usually, this space was a cacophony of hydraulic presses, the whine of high-speed drills, and the rhythmic clanking of the conveyor belts. But today, the power was cut. The machines sat like sleeping giants in the gloom of the industrial lighting, standing on a makeshift platform made of 2 shipping pallets. I looked out at the sea of faces. There were nearly 200 people standing in their blue coveralls, arms crossed, faces etched with a mixture of exhaustion and deep, simmering anger. These were men and women who had spent 20-30 years building the Sanders legacy while I was in New York building spreadsheets. My parents were not here. I had banned them from the floor. I told them their presence would cause a riot, which was true, but the real reason was that I needed the air in the room to be clean. "I am not going to lie to you," I began. My voice echoed slightly off the corrugated metal walls. I didn't use a microphone. I wanted them to hear my real voice, not an amplified version of it. "I am not going to give you the corporate speech about how we are a family and how we are facing some headwinds." I took a step forward, right to the edge of the pallet. "We are in the red zone," I said. "Financially, this company has been bleeding for 2 years. If we continue on the path we were on yesterday, the gates will lock in 30 days, the bank will foreclose, the equipment will be auctioned, and the pension fund will be cents on the dollar." A murmur rippled through the crowd. It was the sound of fear confirming its worst suspicions. "However," I raised my voice, cutting through the rising panic, "that was yesterday. Today is different. Today, we have a pulse." A hand went up in the front row. It was Stan, a shift supervisor with grease permanently stained into his cuticles. He didn't wait to be called on. "We know who you are," Stan said. His voice was gravel, rough from years of shouting over grinders. "You are Gordon's daughter. You went off to Wall Street. Now you come back with your fancy suit and your investment fund. My question is simple. Are you like them? Are you here to squeeze the last few dimes out of us before you sell the land to a developer?" The room held its breath. It was the only question that mattered. "I am Gordon's daughter," I answered, holding his gaze. "But I am not my father. And to prove that, I am going to tell you something that the board didn't want me to share." I pulled a folded piece of paper from my pocket. Effective this morning, the executive payroll has been restructured, I announced. The salary of the CEO and the COO, my parents, has been suspended until the company returns to profitability. The company cars are being returned to the leasing agency tomorrow. The country club memberships paid for by the company are canceled. The murmuring stopped. Shock replaced the anger. In the history of Sanders Microforge, the family's perks were sacrosanct. They were the divine right of kings. And me, I continued, I am taking a salary of $1 a year. My income, and the income of the entire new leadership team, is 100% tied to stock performance. That means if you do not get paid, I do not eat. If this factory closes, I lose everything I put into it. I am not here to strip the assets. I have chained myself to the ship. Talk is cheap, a voice shouted from the back. I looked up. It was Gregson, a procurement manager who had been hired by my father 3 years ago. He was wearing a white shirt that was too tight at the collar, and he was sweating. "She is lying," Gregson yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "I saw the emails. She is bringing in a liquidation team. She is going to outsource the casting division to China. That is why she is here. She is a vulture." The crowd shifted uneasily. Fear is a volatile gas. It only takes a spark to ignite it. Gregson was trying to start a fire. "I am not a liquidator, Mr. Gregson," I said calmly. "Then explain why you stopped the orders from Miller Supply," Gregson shouted. "You are choking the supply chain. You want us to fail so you can write it off." Before I could answer, a boot slammed onto the metal stairs of the platform. Marion Voss walked up. She wasn't wearing a suit. She was wearing work boots, jeans, and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. She looked like she had just crawled out from under a truck, which she probably had. She didn't look at me. She looked straight at Gregson. "She stopped the orders from Miller Supply because Miller is charging us 40% over market rate for substandard aluminum," Marion said. Her voice was like a rasp, cutting through the noise. She held up a tablet. "I looked at the invoices." "Gregson," Marion said. "And then I looked at your bank records. Funny thing. Every time we pay a Miller invoice, 2 days later, a deposit lands in an account under your wife's name. It is called a kickback. And in my factory, it is called stealing." The crowd turned to look at Gregson. The man turned the color of ash. He opened his mouth to argue, but the weight of 200 stares crushed him. "Security," Marion barked. "Escort Mr. Gregson out. He is terminated for cause. And tell the police we will be filing charges for embezzlement." 2 security guards, who looked like they had been waiting for this moment for a long time, stepped forward. They took Gregson by the arms. He didn't fight. He just sagged, the fight draining out of him as the truth stripped him naked. As the doors closed behind him, Marion turned to the crowd. "My name is Marion Voss," she said. "I am going to be running operations here. I do not care who your father is. I do not care who you vote for. I care about one thing. Does the part meet the spec? If it does, we are friends. If it doesn't, we have a problem." She pointed a thumb at me. "She handles the money," Marion said. "I handle the metal, and I am telling you right now, nobody is selling this place. I don't sign on to sinking ships. I sign on to fix them." She stepped back. It was the perfect introduction. Short, brutal, honest. I nodded to Renee Dalton, who was standing at the bottom of the steps. Renee walked up, clutching a binder to her chest. She was shaking, but she looked determined. I wanted to talk about the benefits," Renee said into the quiet room. "I know there have been rumors about the pension fund. I want to confirm that with the new capital injection from Larkspur. The pension fund is fully solvated as of 9 this morning." She opened the binder. "We are also reinstating the overtime pay schedule effective immediately," Renee said, her voice gaining strength. "And we are paying the back pay for the furlough days last month. The checks will be in your accounts by Friday." For the first time, shoulders relaxed. The tension that had been holding the room hostage began to break. Money was the ultimate language of trust. We have a runway, I said, taking the floor again. 30 days to stabilize, 6 months to grow. But we are not just trying to survive, we are trying to win. I paused. This was the gamble. Some of you have asked about the future, I said. You asked if there are orders. The answer is yes. We are currently in final negotiations with Helios Aerospace. A gasp went through the room. Helios was not just a customer. They were the Holy Grail. They were building the next generation of commercial satellites. They need a supplier for the primary thruster housing, I said. It is a complex part. It requires a tolerance that most shops cannot hit. Iron Veil said it couldn't be done, but I told them that Sanders Microforge could do it. I looked at Stan in the front row. I told them we have the best machinists in Pennsylvania, I said. I told them that we don't just cut metal. We engineer reliability. If we can deliver the prototype in 3 weeks, we get the contract. And that contract guarantees this factory runs 3 shifts for the next 5 years. 3 weeks, Stan asked. For a thruster housing? That is impossible. It is impossible for them, Marion interjected. Is it impossible for you? Stan looked at Marion. Then he looked at me. He looked at his hands, scarred and strong. If you get us the right aluminum, Stan said slowly, and if you keep the suits out of our way. You have my word, I said. No suits, just support. Stan nodded. It was a small motion, but it was a seismic shift. He turned to the men behind him. All right, Stan said. Let's get the machines warmed up. A single person clapped, then another, then a whistle pierced the air. Within 10 seconds, the applause wasn't polite. It was raucous. It was the sound of relief, of release, of a group of people who had been waiting to exhale for 2 years. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back. I couldn't cry, not here. As the meeting broke up and the workers headed back to their stations with a renewed energy, I stepped off the pallet. My legs felt weak. Marion lit a cigarette, ignoring the no smoking sign above her head. You did good, kid, she said. You didn't puke. Close call, I admitted. We have the floor, Marion said, blowing smoke toward the ceiling. But Gregson wasn't acting alone. He was too stupid to come up with that liquidator story by himself. I know, I said. My parents fed it to him. I checked my phone. There was a message from the reception desk upstairs. Mr. Elliot Granger's assistant just called. The meeting on Friday is confirmed for 10 a.m. I looked up at the glass windows of the executive offices overlooking the floor. The blinds in my father's office were drawn tight. They weren't watching the town hall. They were too busy preparing their ambush. They thought the town hall didn't matter. They thought the real power was in the boardroom, in the handshake with the big investor. They didn't realize that I had just secured the army while they were busy polishing their crowns. Let's go upstairs, I said to Marion. I have a board meeting to prepare for, and I think my parents are planning a coup. I love a good coup, Marion grinned, dropping the cigarette and crushing it with her boot. It clears the air. I walked out of the factory, the sound of the machines starting up behind me. It was a beautiful noise. It sounded like a heartbeat, but as I rode the elevator up to the executive suite, the dread returned. I had won the battle for the soul of the company, but on Friday, I would have to face the man who held the wallet, and my parents were convinced he was coming to kill me. The euphoria of the town hall lasted exactly 4 hours. By 6 o'clock that evening, the factory floor was humming with the second shift, a sound that usually calmed me, but up in the glass-walled aquarium of the executive suite, the air was becoming unbreathable. I sat at my desk, staring at a discrepancy Renee Dalton had flagged in the legal due diligence. It was a small thing, a missing page number in the footer of the master loan agreement I had purchased from the bank. The pages jumped from 41 to 43. I assumed it was a scanning error. I was wrong. It is not a scanning error, Renee said. Walking into my office, she looked sick. She was holding a physical file folder, the kind with metal prongs that pinch your fingers. I called the bank's archivist. They said they didn't scan page 42 because it was a sealed addendum, a side letter. A side letter, I asked, taking the folder. To a commercial loan that is highly irregular. It is not just irregular, Renee said, sinking into the chair opposite me. It is a death sentence. The bank didn't draft it. Your father's lawyers drafted it. It is a cross-collateralization agreement. I opened the folder. It was empty except for a single cover sheet that referenced a physical document located in the chairman's safe. What does it say? Renee? I asked. My voice was calm, but my pulse was hammering in my throat. I do not have the text, she said, but I have the beneficiary code from the billing department. The lawyers billed the review hours to an external party. She slid a sticky note across the desk. Iron Veil Dynamics. The room spun. Iron Veil was not just a competitor. They were the apex predator of our industry. They were the ones who had been trying to drive us out of business for a decade. And now, my father had them listed as a beneficiary on our loan documents if we default on the covenants, I whispered, the realization dawning on me like a cold sweat. The bank doesn't just get the cash. Iron Veil gets the collateral. And the collateral listed on Schedule 4A isn't the building, Renee finished for me. It is the intellectual property, the patents, the designs for the deep-sea valves, everything that makes this company worth more than the scrap metal in the yard. It was a poison pill. My father had rigged the company so that if he went down, the secrets went to our worst enemy, likely in exchange for a golden parachute or a consultancy fee. He had sold the future to buy himself another year of pretending to be a CEO. Where is the document? I asked. In the wall safe in your parents' office. Renee said, Your mother has the only key on her person. She wears it on that silver chain around her neck. I stood up. Get the legal team on the phone. Tell them to prepare an injunction against any IP transfer. I am going to get that key. I walked down the hallway. My parents were in their office. The door closed. I didn't knock. I pushed the door open with enough force that it bounced off the stopper. Gordon and Diane Sanders were sitting on the leather sofa, drinking scotch. They looked like a couple celebrating a victory I couldn't see. They looked up, startled. Natalie, my mother said, clutching her glass. We were just toasting to Friday. We heard you had a little pep rally downstairs. Cute. Open the safe, I said. My father frowned. Excuse me, you may have the shares, Natalie, but this is still my office until the board formally removes me. I do not have time for your ego. Gordon, I snapped. I walked over to the painting of the factory that covered the wall safe and swung it open. The steel door stared back at me. Open it. I know about the Iron Veil addendum. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's hand went instinctively to her throat, covering the silver chain. My father's face went from flush to pale in the span of a second. He stood up, but his legs looked unsteady. You do not know what you are talking about, he blustered. That was a contingency plan, a standard strategic hedge. A hedge? I laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. You pledged the entire patent portfolio to our biggest rival. If we trip the debt covenant, which we did 3 weeks ago, Iron Veil has the legal right to seize our IP for $1. You didn't hedge the company. Dad, you sold it for parts. We had to, my mother cried out. She stood up, her composure cracking. Iron Veil offered us a bridge loan last year when the banks turned us down. They said they would keep it quiet. They said they just wanted insurance. They wanted to eat you, I said. And you invited them to dinner. I held out my hand. Give me the key. Mom. She looked at my father. He looked away, unable to meet her eyes. He was a man who had run out of lies. Slowly, with trembling fingers, my mother unclasped the chain. She dropped the small brass key into my palm. It felt warm from her skin. I unlocked the safe. Inside, sitting on top of a stack of cash, was a blue leather binder. I opened it. There it was. The Intellectual Property Assignment Agreement, signed by Gordon Sanders and the CEO of Iron Veil Dynamics. Dated 14 months ago, I read the terms. It was worse than I thought. It wasn't just upon default. It was upon change of control. You idiot, I whispered, reading the clause. Section 8.2. If the Sanders family loses majority voting control, Iron Vale has the option to purchase the IP. I looked up at them. By buying the company to save it, I almost triggered the sale of everything we own. Did you even read this? I didn't think you would ever actually get the shares, my father mumbled. He sat back down, heavily. I thought you were just playing at finance. I thought you would get bored and go back to New York. I never get bored. Dad, I said. I get even. My mother started to cry. It wasn't the polite, manipulative crying she used in board meetings. This was ugly. Gasping, sobbing. She covered her face with her hands. We just wanted more time, she wailed. We thought if we could just get the new product line launched, we could pay them off. We didn't want you to know we were failing. We didn't want you to look at us the way you are looking at us right now. I looked at them. I saw a man and a woman who had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. They were terrified. They weren't titans of industry. They were just two scared people who had dug a hole so deep they couldn't see the sky anymore. I felt a surge of pity, but I strangled it. Pity was a luxury we could not afford. I am not looking at you with judgment because you failed, I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. Every business fails sometimes. Markets change. Products fail. That is math. I slammed the binder shut. I am judging you because you lied, I said. You lied to me. You lied to the bank. And you lied to the 200 families whose livelihoods depend on those patents. You were willing to let Iron Vale gut this place just so you didn't have to admit to your daughter that you needed help. We are your parents, my father shouted, trying to rally one last defense. We built this. You are ungrateful. I am the only thing standing between you and a fraud indictment, I shouted back. Do you think Iron Vale is going to be nice when I tell them the deal is void because of undisclosed conflicts? They will sue you personally. They will take the house. They will take everything. My father fell silent. He poured another drink, his hand shaking so badly the crystal decanter rattled against the glass. I took the binder. I am taking this, and I am taking the key. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed. It was Walter Klein. I just got off the phone with the investor's legal team. They are asking about an IP contingency. They know. Natalie, if this isn't resolved by Friday, Elliot Granger walks away, and he triggers the Iron Vale clause on his way out. I stared at the text. The trap was tighter than I thought. I walked back to my office. Renee was waiting. We have to build a file, I said. A white file. What goes in it? Renee asked, opening her laptop. Everything, I said. The Iron Vale agreement, the audit trail of the kickbacks to Miller Supply, and the log of the anonymous email my mother sent to the bank. You are going to use the email, Renee asked. That is the nuclear option. It proves your mother committed corporate sabotage. I need leverage, I said. On Friday, I am walking into a room with Elliot Granger and my parents. My parents think Granger is there to save them. Granger probably thinks I am an amateur who let the IP get compromised. I need to prove that the rot is localized to 2 people and that I have surgically removed them. We worked until 3 a.m. We assembled the timeline. We drafted the affidavits. We created a dossier that detailed 20 years of mismanagement, culminating in the treasonous deal with Iron Vale. It was a document that would destroy my parents' reputation forever if it ever leaked to the press. I put the dossier in a plain white envelope. I didn't write a name on it. At 9 o'clock the next morning, 24 hours before the big meeting, I went down to the cafeteria to get coffee. The mood was lighter. The workers were eating breakfast, talking about the overtime shifts. They smiled at me. For the first time, I felt like I belonged here. But the text message from my father came through at 9:15, shattering the peace. We spoke to Mr. Granger directly this morning. He agrees that family stability is key. He is looking forward to meeting the real management tomorrow. He was delusional. He was still trying to spin the narrative. He thought that because he played golf with the same people Granger knew, he was safe. He didn't understand that capital has no friends, only interests. I walked back up to the office. I passed my father in the hallway. He was wearing a fresh suit, his hair perfectly coiffed. He looked like the CEO again. You should really wear something softer tomorrow. Natalie, he said, pausing to look me up and down. Mr. Granger is old school. He doesn't like aggressive women. Mr. Granger likes returns, I said, and I am the only one who can give them to him. We will see, my father said, a smug smile playing on his lips. He knows about the Iron Veil situation. I explained it to him. I told him it was a necessary shield against your hostile takeover. He understood. He is a reasonable man. My father leaned in, his cologne overpowering. Let the biggest investor decide who understands business, he said. Tomorrow, you are going to learn that blood is thicker than a term sheet. He walked away, whistling. I went into my office and locked the door. I placed the white envelope on my desk. My father thought he had charmed the investor. He thought he had explained away the betrayal. He was wrong, but his confidence terrified me. What if Elliot Granger was one of them? What if he was just another old man who believed that a nice girl shouldn't be running a factory? I looked at the white envelope. Inside was the evidence that would bury my parents. I hoped I didn't have to use it, but as I watched the rain start to fall over Pittsburgh again, turning the world gray, I knew that tomorrow wasn't going to be a meeting. It was going to be an execution, and I had to make sure I wasn't the one against the wall. Friday morning arrived with the artificial brightness of a stage set. When I walked into the boardroom at 9:45, I stopped in the doorway. The room had been transformed. The clutter of our crisis meetings, the takeout coffee cups, the stacks of distressingly red spreadsheets, the whiteboard covered in frantic calculations was gone. In its place was a scene of serene, delusional stability. My mother had ordered fresh lilies, massive white arrangements that smelled cloying and funeral sweet. They sat in the center of the table, blocking the line of sight. Crystal carafes of water were sweating on silver coasters. My father sat at the head of the table, not in his usual shirt sleeves, but in a three-piece navy suit that he hadn't worn since the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the West Wing 10 years ago. They were staging a coronation. They were preparing to be reinstated as the kings and queens of Sanders Microforge, and they had set a small, folding chair for me at the far end of the table, away from the power center. You look tired. Natalie, my mother said as I entered. She was wearing her pearls, the ones she usually kept in the safe deposit box. You should sit in the back. Let the men do the talking today. Mr. Granger is a traditionalist. I will sit where the equity sits, I said, pulling the folding chair away and taking the leather seat directly to my father's right. My father adjusted his cufflinks. He didn't look at me. He was vibrating with a nervous, manic energy. Do not embarrass us, Natalie. Elliot Granger is not just an investor. He is an institution. I spoke to his people. He understands the value of legacy. He is coming here to help us stabilize the family control, not to hand it over to a hedge fund algorithm. They truly believed it. They believed that because they had made a few frantic phone calls to mutual acquaintances at the country club, Elliot Granger was coming to rescue them from their rebellious daughter. They thought he was their white knight. At precisely 10 o'clock, the double doors opened. Elliot Granger did not look like a white knight. He looked like a glacier in a bespoke suit. He was a man in his late 60s, with eyes the color of flint, and a stillness that commanded more respect than my father's shouting ever could. He walked into the room followed by two silent associates who carried briefcases like weapons. My father stood up, his smile wide and practiced. Elliot, thank you for coming. It is an honor to welcome you to Sanders Microforge. He extended his hand. Granger shook it briefly, his expression unreadable, then moved to the seat opposite my father. He didn't sit. He remained standing, placing his hands on the back of the chair. Gordon, Granger said. His voice was low, a rumble that seemed to come from the floorboards. Time is short. My team has reviewed the financials. Let's skip the tour and talk about the money. Of course, my father said, sitting down and gesturing grandly to the room. We appreciate your interest. As you know, we have had some internal friction recently. A hostile element within the shareholder base has been trying to force a restructuring that is simply not compatible with our values. He cast a sideways glance at me, a look of pity and dismissal. We need capital, Elliot, my father continued, his voice taking on the tone of a statesman. We need $180 million to clear the debt and modernize the line. But we cannot accept it if it comes with the strings attached by my daughter's fund. We are looking for a partner who respects the founders. We are looking for someone who understands that you cannot run a business on spreadsheets alone. Granger listened. He didn't blink. He waited until my father had finished his pitch, which ended with a plea for patient capital to restore the family honor. So, Granger said, turning his gaze to my mother, you are asking me to buy out Larkspur Capital's position. Exactly, my mother said, leaning forward eagerly. Buy out her debt, buy out her shares, restore the voting rights to the family trust. We will give you a seat on the board. Of course, but we need to end this disruptive chapter. Granger nodded slowly. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick document. It was the term sheet I had forced them to sign earlier that week. I am confused, Granger said. I am holding a term sheet here. It pledges $180 million to the company. It outlines a complete governance overhaul. It demands the removal of the current executive team from operational control. That is the document she forced on us, my father interrupted, pointing a finger at me. That is the hostile deal. We want you to tear that up and write a new one. Granger looked at the document, then he looked at me, then he looked back at my father. Gordon, Granger said, who do you think signed this term sheet? She did, my father spat. Natalie, on behalf of her little fund, Larkspur. Granger opened the document to the signature page. He spun it around on the polished wood so it faced my parents. Look at the signature below hers, Granger said. My father looked, he squinted, then he froze. The signature was bold, angular, and unmistakable. Elliot Granger, Managing Partner, Sovereign Industrial Trust. Larkspur Capital is a specialized vehicle, Granger said, his voice cutting through the room like a cold wind. But the money inside it, the $180 million you are begging for, that is my money. Gordon, Larkspur is my deployment arm for distressed assets. Natalie Sanders is not a hostile element. She is my principal. She is the one who manages my capital. The silence that slammed into the room was violent. The lilies seemed to wilt under the weight of it. My mother's mouth opened, but no sound came out. My father looked as if he had been struck in the chest with a sledgehammer. You, my father stammered, you are backing her. I am not backing her, Granger corrected him. I am following her. I came here today because she told me this company was worth saving. You called me for help. I am the one she called 3 months ago to design the rescue package. Granger walked around the table. He stopped behind my chair. He didn't touch me, but his presence was a shield. You told me on the phone this morning that your daughter does not understand business, Granger said. He looked at my father with profound disappointment. Gordon, in the last 10 years, your daughter has returned 300% on the portfolios she manages for me. She has saved 5 manufacturing plants in the Rust Belt while you were busy playing golf and hiding debt in side letters. Granger placed a hand on the table. I only sign checks for people who understand reality, he said. And right now, the only person in this room who understands the reality of Sanders Microforge is sitting right here. He nodded at me. My father's face turned a mottled purple. The humiliation was total. He had tried to sell me out to the very man I had brought to the table. He had tried to appeal to a Keys Club that didn't exist. This is a trick, my mother whispered. You set us up. I gave you a choice, I said. My voice was steady, though my heart was racing. I gave you the term sheet. I gave you the chance to exit with dignity. You chose to fight. You chose to try and go behind my back. We will not accept this. My father stood up, knocking his chair over. It crashed onto the floor, a jarring noise in the quiet room. I will not let you take my company. I will not let you hand it over to him. You do not have a choice, Gordon, Granger said calmly, because I have seen the Iron Veil Agreement. My father went still. Natalie sent me the diligence file last night, Granger said. You pledged the IP to a competitor. That is a breach of fiduciary duty. If I walk out of this room right now, I will pull the funding. The bank will foreclose by Tuesday, and because of the clause you signed, Iron Veil will own your patents by Wednesday morning. Granger leaned in close. I am the only thing standing between you and total annihilation. And the only reason I am here is because your daughter asked me to give you a chance. A chance? My father laughed. A broken, hysterical sound. To be a puppet, to watch her sit in my chair. To save the jobs of 200 people, I said. To keep the Sanders name on the building. That is what matters. Dad, not your title, the company. Granger looked at his watch. I have a flight to Zurich at 2. Here's the deal. The capital flows today, but only if 3 conditions are met. 1. The Iron Veil side letter is legally nullified immediately my lawyers are already handling the injunction. 2. The governance restructure happens exactly as Natalie drafted it. And 3, my mother asked, her voice trembling. 3, Granger said. Gordon and Diane Sanders resign from the board effectively immediately. No, my father said. Excuse me. Granger raised an eyebrow. No, my father repeated. He gripped the edge of the table. The shock was fading, replaced by a stubborn, irrational fury. I built this. I walked this floor when it was dirt. You think you can walk in here with your money and my traitor daughter and push me out? I am not resigning. I am the majority shareholder until the conversion happens, and I will fight this. You signed the term sheet, I reminded him. I signed it under duress. My father shouted, I will challenge it in court. I will tie this money up in litigation for years. If I go down, I burn it down. If you sue, I said. The bank freezes the accounts again. We miss payroll next week. The company dies. Then let it die, my father screamed. The words hung in the air. He had finally said it. He had finally admitted that his ego was more important than the survival of the thing he claimed to love. My mother looked at him, horrified. She reached out to touch his arm, but he pulled away. I am declaring a proxy war, my father said, his breathing heavy. I will rally the remaining shareholders. I will go to the press. I will tell them you tricked us. I will tell them you are a predator. He looked at Granger. You want to invest in a war zone, Elliot? Go ahead, but you won't see a dime of return until I am dead. Granger looked at my father with a mixture of pity and steel. He buttoned his jacket. Very well, Granger said. I like a good fight. But understand this, Gordon, you aren't fighting me. You are fighting the inevitable. Granger turned to me. He extended his hand. I shook it. I will transfer the first tranche of capital into the escrow account, Granger said to me, ignoring my parents completely. It will sit there, contingent on the resolution of this dispute. You have the ammunition. Natalie, finish it. I will, I said. Granger walked out. The 2 associates followed. The door clicked shut. I stood up. My father was panting, his face red, his eyes wild. He looked like a king standing in a burning castle, convinced the fire was a celebration. You think you won, my father hissed at me. You think because you brought the big man in. I am scared I'm going to destroy you. Natalie, I am going to make sure no one in this town ever hires you again. I picked up the file Granger had left on the table. You really don't get it, do you? I asked softly. I didn't bring him here to fight you. I brought him here to pay for the future. You are the one who decided to make it a war. I walked to the door. I looked back at them, my mother weeping into her hands, my father staring defiantly at the wall. Get your lawyers ready, Dad, I said, because on Monday, I am not coming as your daughter. I am coming as the majority. I left the room. The smell of the lilies followed me out. They didn't smell like a coronation anymore. They smelled like a grave. The 72 hours following the disastrous meeting with Elliot Granger were not a business negotiation. They were a knife fight in a phone booth. My father did not go home to lick his wounds. He went to the trenches. He turned the weekend into a frantic campaign trail. treating the shareholder vote like a political election where the truth was optional and fear was the currency. He set up a command center in the guest house of their estate. From there, he and my mother began calling every minor shareholder, every retired machinist holding a few hundred shares, and every trustee of the employee stock ownership plan. Their message was simple, emotional, and terrifyingly effective. Natalie Sanders is a Wall Street liquidator. She is going to strip the company, fire the seniors, and move production overseas. A vote for the family is a vote to keep your job. They hosted a barbecue on Saturday afternoon for the ESOP representatives. I heard about it from Stan, the shift supervisor. He told me my father stood on a crate with a beer in his hand, weeping about legacy and loyalty, promising that if they helped him kick me out, he would guarantee their pensions personally. It was a lie. He didn't have the liquidity to guarantee a used car, let alone a pension fund. But desperate people believe beautiful lies. I fought back with the only weapon I had, the cold. Hard math of survival. I didn't host a barbecue. I sent a memo. It was titled, "The Cost of Nostalgia." In it, I laid out the binary reality we were facing. I explained that our credit line with PNC Bank was conditional on the new capital injection. I attached a letter from the bank's risk officer stating clearly that if the governance restructuring failed, they would pull the revolving credit facility by Tuesday close of business. If the family wins, I wrote in bold text, the company files for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in 14 days. There will be no pension, there will be no jobs, there will only be a padlock on the gate. It was a grim message, and it wasn't popular. The tracking data showed the email was opened, read, and forwarded, but the sentiment analysis on the internal message boards was split. Half the employees were terrified of the bank. The other half were terrified of me. Then came the betrayal. Marcus Thorne was a board member who had sat at that table for 15 years. He was a quiet man, a former lawyer who usually voted whichever way the wind was blowing. I had counted him as a neutral vote. On Sunday morning, Walter Klein called me. "Marcus is flipping," Walter said, his voice tight. "Your father promised him the vice chairman seat and a consulting retainer of $50,000 a year if he votes to block your removal." "He can't do that," I said, pacing my living room. "That is vote buying. It is illegal." "It is only illegal if you can prove it," Walter said. "And Gordon isn't putting it in writing. He is doing it over scotch." I hung up. I knew Marcus. He was greedy, but he was also risk-averse. I called Marcus. I put the phone on speaker and signaled my lawyer, who was sitting across from me, to start the recording device. This was Pennsylvania, a two-party consent state for recording, but my lawyer had advised me that under the Federal Wiretap Act, recording a conversation to obtain evidence of a felony like corporate bribery was a gray area we were willing to navigate. "Marcus," I said when he answered, "I hear you are reconsidering your position on the restructuring." "Well, Natalie," Marcus said, his voice oily and evasive, "your father makes a compelling case for continuity. He feels that with a stronger ally on the board, someone with legal experience, like myself, we could navigate this without your investor." "And the consulting fee?" I asked. "The $50,000, is that part of the continuity plan?" There was a pause. A smart man would have hung up. Marcus was not a smart man. He was a greedy one. "It is a standard retainer for enhanced board duties," Marcus said. "Gordon thinks my expertise is undervalued." "I see," I said. "Just remember, Marcus, if the ship sinks, the consultant doesn't get paid either." I ended the call. I looked at my lawyer. He nodded. We had him acknowledging the quid pro quo. It wasn't enough to arrest him, but it was enough to force his resignation if I played it right. But the chaos was just beginning. At noon on Sunday, a courier delivered a letter to the board secretary. It was an unsolicited offer from Iron Veil Dynamics. My father had clearly leaked the internal chaos to them, hoping to use them as a bogeyman or a savior. Depending on which way the wind blew, Iron Veil was offering to buy all outstanding shares for $12 a share. It was a 20% premium over our current internal valuation. To a scared employee with 5,000 shares, That looked like a winning lottery ticket. They could cash out, take the money, and run. The message boards lit up. Why fight for a dying company when we can sell today? Because, I typed into the reply box, my fingers trembling with rage. Read page 10, paragraph 4. The offer contained a consolidation clause. Ironvale wasn't planning to run the factory. They were planning to absorb the IP and shut down the Pittsburgh facility within 6 months to eliminate redundancy. If you sell to Ironvale, I posted, you get $12 today, and you lose your job in December, and your pension gets rolled into their underfunded plan. Panic was setting in. The shareholders were oscillating between my father's emotional plea, Ironvale's cash bait, and my grim warnings. The vote was too close to call. I needed the nuclear option. I needed Elliot Granger. I called him on his private line. They are wobbling. Elliot, Ironvale is throwing cash at them. I need you to go public. I do not do press releases for family squabbles. Natalie, Granger said. This isn't a squabble anymore, I said. It is a proxy war for the survival of American manufacturing. If Ironvale wins, this factory becomes a condo complex. If my father wins, it becomes a tax write-off. You are the only reality check they will believe. An hour later, a statement appeared on the Bloomberg terminal and was immediately faxed to the union reps. Statement from Elliot Granger, Managing Partner, Sovereign Industrial Trust. My commitment of $180 million to Sanders Microforge is exclusively contingent upon the implementation of the restructuring plan designed by Natalie Sanders. I have zero interest in a partnership with the current management, nor will I participate in a bidding war with Ironvale. If the shareholder vote on Monday fails to ratify the new governance structure, Sovereign Industrial Trust will withdraw its offer permanently at 5 p.m. EST. It was a line in the sand. He was telling them, choose Natalie or choose death. To back it up, Marion Voss released her 100-day sprint plan. It was a masterpiece of operational clarity. She didn't talk about synergies or paradigms. She talked about fixing the broken CNC machine. She talked about renegotiating the aluminum contracts to save 4% on raw materials. She showed a path to profitability that didn't involve firing a single person. The tide began to turn. I could feel it. The rational voices in the ESOP were starting to drown out the fear. But a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. Late Sunday night, I was in the office with Renee. We were exhausted, running on caffeine and adrenaline, counting the proxy votes as they trickled in. We are up by 2%, Renee said, rubbing her eyes. If the union bloc holds, we win. She hesitated. Natalie, there is something else. About the email. The insider trading tip, I asked. I kept digging, Renee said. I found the chat logs from the IT support ticket system. Your mother asked how to use the VPN 2 hours before the email was sent. But, Renee turned her laptop around. Read this message from your father to her. Sent 5 minutes before that. I read the text log. Gordon, do it. Diane, do it now. We have to stop the bank. If you do not send it, you are helping her destroy us. Do not be weak. I stared at the screen. My mother hadn't done it out of malice. She had done it because she was being bullied. My father had weaponized her fear and her loyalty to make her pull the trigger on her own daughter. She is cracking, Natalie, Renee said. I saw her in the hallway yesterday. She looks like a ghost. She knows that if Gordon wins, he is just going to do this again in a year. She knows he is the problem. She knows, I said softly, but she has spent 40 years protecting his ego. She doesn't know how to stop. Then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from a contact I had in the local press, a journalist I had known since high school. Nat, heads up. Your dad's lawyer just sent over a background dossier on you. It is ugly. Claims you were fired from your last job for instability. Claims you are on medication that impairs your judgment. They want me to run it tomorrow morning before the vote. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was a lie. I had left Larkspur on excellent terms. Hell, I was still a principal there. And the medication claim, complete fabrication. He was going to smear my mental health in the national press just to keep his seat at the head of the table. He is going to scorch the earth, I whispered. He doesn't care if the company survives. As long as I don't. I looked at the white envelope sitting in my safe. The white file. Inside was the proof of the Miller kickbacks, the proof of the Iron Veil IP sale, the proof of the coercion. It was enough to send my father to jail, or at the very least, destroy his reputation so thoroughly he wouldn't be able to get a membership at a public library, let alone a country club. I had hesitated. I had told myself I didn't want to be the daughter who destroyed her father, but he had just made the decision for me. "Renee," I said, standing up, "call the audiovisual team. Tell them I need the projector in the main hall set up for the vote tomorrow." "What are you going to do?" Renee asked, seeing the look in my eyes. I walked to the safe and spun the dial. I took out the white envelope. It felt heavy, like it was filled with lead. "I am going to finish it," I said. "He wants to talk about character, fine. Let's talk about character." I walked to the window and looked out at the dark factory. The parking lot was empty, but in a few hours, it would be full of people deciding their future. "I am not going to win a proxy war," I said to the reflection in the glass. "I am going to hold a trial." I sent a text to my mother. Just one line. "I know about the Miller kickbacks. I know about Iron Veil, and I know he forced you to send the email. Don't let him make you fall on the sword for him tomorrow." There was no reply. I didn't expect one, but I knew she would read it, and I knew that when she walked into that room tomorrow, she would be carrying the weight of 40 years of silence tomorrow. The silence would end, one way or another. The conference room where we held the vote did not look like a place of business. It looked like a courtroom where a capital crime was about to be adjudicated. Every chair was taken. The overflow crowd spilled into the hallway, standing shoulder to shoulder. The air conditioning was fighting a losing battle against the body heat of 200 anxious people. On the left side of the room sat the old guard, my father's golf buddies, a few terrified middle managers, and the lawyer from Holloway and Tate. On the right side sat the New Order, Marion Voss, Renee Dalton, the union reps, and me. Between us sat the shareholders, the retirees and windbreakers, the current machinists in clean work shirts, and the nervous trustees of the family estate. They held the colored cards that would decide whether Sanders Microforge lived or died. My father took the podium first. He did not look like the broken man I had seen in the office yesterday. He looked like a politician on the campaign trail, flush with the energy of desperation. He didn't talk about the debt. He didn't talk about the falling production numbers. Instead, he held up a thick manila envelope. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming with a practiced gravitas, "we are here to save the soul of this company. You have heard a lot of fancy numbers from my daughter. You have heard about efficiency and modernization, but you have not heard the truth about why she is really here." He opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of papers. "This is the employment record from Larkspur Capital." He lied. "This dossier proves that Natalie Sanders was not promoted. She was placed on administrative leave for erratic behavior. It documents a history of instability. It suggests that her investment here is nothing more than a personal vendetta fueled by a mental breakdown." A gasp rippled through the room. The machinists looked at me. The retirees whispered to one another. It was a lie so bold, so vicious, that it momentarily sucked the oxygen out of the room. He was painting me as a madwoman to save his own seat. "I cannot let a person in this condition run your pension fund," my father concluded, slamming the papers onto the podium. "Vote for stability, vote for the family, vote to send her back to New York where she can get the help she needs." He stepped back, a look of tragic triumph on his face. He thought he had just delivered the kill shot. I stood up. I didn't walk to the podium. I walked to the laptop connected to the projector. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked at Renee Dalton. "Connect the screen," I said. "Are you sure?" Renee whispered. "Once we do this, there is no going back." "Connect it," I commanded. The screen behind the podium flickered to life. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a timeline. "My father wants to talk about instability," I said. my voice clear and steady without a microphone. He wants to talk about vendettas. So let's talk about them. I click the remote. The first image appeared. It was the scanned copy of the Iron Veil Dynamics agreement, the secret side letter pledging the patents. This is a contract signed by Gordon Sanders 14 months ago. I narrated. It pledges every patent, every blueprint, and every trade secret of this company to our direct competitor, Iron Veil. It triggers automatically if the family loses control. He didn't just mortgage the house, he sold the foundation. My father surged forward. That is a lie, that is a fabrication. It is notarized, Dad, I said coldly, and the original is in my possession. I clicked again. The screen changed. Now it showed the log of the anonymous email sent to the bank, the one accusing me of insider trading that had frozen our credit line. And right below it, the text message from my father's phone to my mother's phone. Gordon, do it. Diane, do it now. We have to stop the bank. If you do not send it, you are helping her destroy us. Do not be weak. My father claims I am unstable, I said, pointing to the screen. But he is the one who coerced his wife into committing federal wire fraud to sabotage his own company's credit rating, just to spite his daughter. The room was deadly silent. The workers looked at the screen, then at my father. The accusation of instability evaporated instantly, replaced by the stark, ugly reality of his manipulation. My father turned purple. This is illegal. You hacked my phone. I will have you arrested. He looked at my mother, who was sitting in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was staring at the floor. Tell them, Diane, he shouted at her. Tell them she is twisting the context. Stand up and defend your husband. My mother slowly raised her head. She looked at the screen. She saw her own shame projected in high definition. She looked at the faces of the employees she had known for 30 years, people whose children she had sent birthday cards to. Then she looked at me. She stood up, but she didn't turn to the crowd. She turned to my father. Sit down, Gordon, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a breaking dam. Diane. My father blinked, confused. What are you doing? I said sit down, she repeated, her voice shaking but gaining strength. It is over. The email is real. The Iron Veil deal is real. We did it. We did all of it. My father froze. The betrayal from his frantic partner was the one thing he hadn't calculated. My mother turned to the room. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her makeup, but she didn't wipe them away. I am sorry, she said to the room. We were afraid. We were afraid of losing the status. We were afraid of admitting that the world had moved too fast for us. We thought we were protecting the family name, but we were just protecting our pride, and we were willing to sacrifice your jobs to do it. She looked at me. Natalie isn't the unstable one. She is the only reason the lights are still on. My father slumped. It wasn't a physical blow, but he collapsed into his chair as if his strings had been cut. The room watched the king fall, not with a bang, but with a confession from his queen. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I felt a profound sadness, but I pushed it aside. There was work to do. Thank you, Mom, I said softly. I turned off the projector. The ugly truth faded to black. We do not have to talk about the past anymore, I announced, shifting instantly into command mode. Let's talk about the future. Effective this morning, my legal team has filed an injunction voiding the Iron Veil agreement based on undisclosed conflict of interest. That threat is gone. I gestured to the back of the room. Elliot Granger stood up. He walked to the front, standing next to me. I have transferred the first tranche of capital $10 million into the company escrow account this morning, Granger said. His voice was like granite. I do not invest in sentiment. I do not invest in ego. I invest in people who understand reality, and the reality is that this management team, he pointed to me and Marion, is the only investment I am willing to make. Marion Voss stepped forward next. She was holding a tablet. And we have work to do, Marion barked. I just got off the phone with Helios Aerospace. They reviewed our prototype specs. They liked the tolerance numbers. We have the contract. A cheer erupted from the back of the room, spontaneous and raw. It is a 5-year deal, Marion shouted over the noise. 3 shifts, full capacity. We start Monday, but we only start if we have a board that lets us work. The cheer died down as the reality of the vote returned. The emotion was there, but the ballot still had to be cast. The choice is yours, I said to the shareholders. You can vote for the past, which ends in bankruptcy next week, or you can vote for the future, which starts right now. I sat down. The voting process took an hour. It was agonizing. I watched the ESOP trustees huddle. I watched the small shareholders argue. My father sat in his chair, staring at the wall, a man alone in a crowded room. My mother sat 2 seats away from him, weeping silently. Finally, the corporate secretary walked to the podium with the tally sheet. On the motion to restructure the board and appoint Natalie Sanders as chairwoman, the secretary read, his hands trembling slightly. The motion passes, 51.2% in favor. It wasn't a landslide. It was a sliver. The loyalty to my father ran deep, but the fear of unemployment ran deeper. The ESOP had swung the vote. The workers had chosen their jobs over their nostalgia. The room exhaled. Then, slowly, applause started. It wasn't polite applause. It was the applause of survivors. People were hugging. Renee Dalton was crying into her binder. Marion Voss gave me a thumbs up and immediately pulled out her phone to call the aluminum supplier. I looked at my father. He hadn't moved. He was watching the workers celebrating his removal. He looked small. He looked old. Then, he looked at me. For 32 years, he had looked at me with expectation, with disappointment, or with dismissal. But in that moment, across the crowded boardroom, he looked at me with something else, respect. He gave me a single, slow nod. It was the admission that he had lost to a superior opponent. It was the realization that the little girl he had tried to banish had just saved him from the ignominy of total failure. He would keep his shares. He would keep his wealth. He just lost his power. And perhaps, he finally understood that he never really knew how to wield it. I didn't go over to him. We were not ready for that. I stood up and walked out of the double doors. The hallway was empty. The air was cool. I could hear the sound of the factory starting up again below me, the hum of the ventilation, the thud of the presses. It was the music of a living thing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was the notification from the bank. The credit freeze was lifted. The funds were available. I typed a text message to my mother. I did not want to win against you. Mom. I just wanted the company to live. Go home and rest. We will handle the night shift. I put the phone away and walked toward the elevator. I didn't look back. The revenge wasn't in the destruction of my family. It was in the salvation of their legacy. Despite their best efforts to destroy it, they said I would never understand business. They were right. I didn't understand their business. I understood the future, and the future was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening on your commute, at the gym, or maybe winding down at home? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey of justice and redemption, please subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who need a little victory in their day.